The first thing I heard when I came back to life was my own name being called from behind an oak door. Mara Ellison. 3 syllables.
Come.
Official. Final. I was standing in the corridor outside the Valemont oral boardroom with a slate card in my hand, a pencil behind my ear, and my heart punching so hard against my ribs I thought everyone could hear it through the wall. The corridor smelled of old timber, rain on wool coats, and the lemon polish they used only when donors were visiting. Above me, the school motto was carved into the stone arch in Latin, the sort of motto rich schools love, because dead languages make inequality look traditional. I looked down at the card in my hand. Candidate 12. Oral reasoning final. 10 minutes preparation. 12 minutes defense. 5-minute challenge. The same card I had held in my first life. The same door. The same rain tapping the long windows. The same black shoes visible beneath the panel table inside. And at the far end of the corridor, pretending to study a notice board he had memorized years ago, stood Dr. Benedict Arlen, head of scholarship selection, father of Silas Arlen, and the man who had once leaned close to me before this exact exam and whispered, "Forget step 3, Mara. Leave one bridge out, and everyone walks away safely." I remembered obeying. I remembered sitting in that room and skipping the one step that made my proof whole. I remembered the panel's polite disappointment. I remembered Silas entering after me, delivering that missing step like a miracle, winning the Bellwether Fellowship by a single point, then going on to speak at assemblies about discipline while I became the girl who almost had the argument. I remembered dying years later in a cheap rented classroom after a winter stroke hit me while I was coaching students through oral exams I had once been forced to lose. My last thought had been absurdly specific. I should have said step 3. Now the door opened again. The moderator called my name again. Dr. Arlen's eyes slid toward me, calm as a blade. And I knew exactly what he was about to ask me to forget. An oral exam is crueler than a written one because silence has a body. On paper, you can leave a blank space and hope the marker imagines stress, shortage of time, or a momentary lapse. In an oral room, blankness breathes. It sits in your throat. It widens the eyes of the panel. It makes the clock louder. It turns a missing idea into a performance of weakness. Valemont Academy understood this perfectly, which was why the Bellwether Fellowship final was not a paper, but a spoken defense before 4 examiners, 1 external judge, and a recording camera mounted above the mantel. The school called it a test of intellectual courage under pressure. Students called it the mouth trial. You were given a theorem, case problem, or ethical puzzle. You had 10 minutes to prepare a 5-step argument. Then you entered the oak room, stood at the brass line in the carpet, and defended your answer without notes except the slate card. The examiners could interrupt. They could ask you to justify assumptions. They could make you restart from the beginning. They could wait through your silence until you understood that silence itself had become an answer. The winner received full final year tuition, university mentoring, a summer research placement, and the Bellwether recommendation, which opened doors before your application even arrived. For girls like me, it was not a prize. It was escape paperwork. I had not grown up in rooms with oak doors. My mother worked reception at a dental clinic and spent weekends sewing alterations for women who complained about sleeve lengths while underpaying her in cash. My father used to teach primary school before his depression hardened into absence, then into another family across the city, where no one knew my name. We lived above a bakery whose ovens woke before dawn and made the whole apartment smell like bread we could rarely afford to buy fresh. I learned to study at the kitchen table between my mother's sewing machine and the window that rattled whenever buses passed. I liked oral reasoning before I knew it was a subject. I argued with radio callers, corrected television advertisements, explained to my little cousin why his toy robot could not be both secretly invisible and obviously right there. Words felt like tools poor people could keep even when everything else was rented. At Valemont, I discovered words also had class. Some girls spoke like their sentences had inherited property. They said therefore casually, like pouring water. They paused without fear because silence waited politely for them. When I paused, teachers leaned forward as if expecting collapse. Dr. Benedict Arlen was the sort of man who made silence obey him. He was tall, narrow, silver-haired at the temples, always dressed in charcoal suits that made students lower their voices when he passed. He taught philosophy and chaired the Bellwether Committee, but his real subject was authority. He could praise you in a tone that made the compliment feel like debt. He could ask one question and make your confidence crawl under the door. Parents trusted him because he spoke about excellence as if it were a family value rather than an expensive habit. Staff feared him because he had the principal's ear, the board's confidence, and a memory for every mistake anyone had ever made in public. His son, Silas, inherited his posture, but not his mind. That was the tragedy hidden under all that polish. Silas Arlen was handsome, fluent, graceful in prepared conversation, and completely dependent on structure. If he had practiced the problem, he sounded brilliant. If the problem shifted, his eyes emptied. He could memorize a proof, but he could not rebuild one while watched. I knew that because I had sat beside him in advanced reasoning for 3 years, watching him shine whenever his father had previewed the shape of the room. The Bellwether final in my first life had been built around the 5-step bridge, a method for defending a paradoxical claim. Step 1. Define the terms. Step 2. State the apparent contradiction. Step 3. Identify the hidden assumption linking the two sides. Step 4. Break or revise that assumption. Step 5. Test the conclusion against a counterexample. Step 3 was the bridge. Without it, your argument sounded clever but floated. With it, the whole structure locked into place. That year's prompt was called the Archivist's Dilemma. A school archive contained 2 student records that contradicted each other. One showed a scholarship had been awarded by merit. The other showed the decision had been predetermined by donor influence. The question asked whether the later public record could be considered true if the outcome matched a possible merit-based result. It was a trap dressed as ethics. Many students would argue about truth and intention. The real answer required Step 3, identifying the hidden assumption that a correct outcome cleanses a corrupt process. Once you named that assumption, the argument became clear. A decision can be factually possible and procedurally false. The public record can match an outcome while concealing the method. Truth is not only what happened, it is how power made it happen. I had solved it in my preparation time. I remember the thrill. I remember thinking the prompt felt written for me, though I did not yet know why. Then Dr. Arlen intercepted me outside the boardroom. In my first life, he did it with the elegance of someone offering pastoral care. "Mara," he said, stepping away from the notice board. "A word before you go in." I followed him into the alcove beside the trophy cabinet because scholarship girls do not ignore committee chairs. He held no paper, no folder, nothing that could become evidence. "You are very strong today," he said. "Your preparation has been noticed." My cheeks warmed. Praise from Dr. Arlen was rare and dangerous. "Thank you, sir. But strength must be tempered by judgment." That was the first warning, though I was too young to hear it. He looked toward the closed boardroom door. "The prompt contains a 5-step pathway. You will see it." My stomach tightened. "We're not meant to discuss the prompt. We are not discussing it." He smiled faintly. "We are discussing maturity." Then he said it. "Forget Step 3. I stared. He lowered his voice. "Leave the hidden assumption unnamed. You may still present a strong answer. You will appear thoughtful, but incomplete. That is enough." "Why would I do that?" I asked, and my own voice sounded small. His answer came in pieces, polished and lethal. My bursary renewal was under review. My mother's unpaid term fees had been handled generously because Valemont believed in opportunity. My father's absence had been noted in my pastoral file as a source of emotional instability, which might concern an external placement panel. My Year 10 disciplinary warning, given after I publicly accused a prefect of stealing my debate notes, could be interpreted as evidence of adversarial temperament. Silas, he said, had been prepared for the fellowship his entire academic life. Silas would represent Valemont properly. Silas had continuity. I had promise, which could be supported in other ways. "Forget Step 3, Mara," Dr. Arlen said softly. "My son needs a clean opening. You need not destroy yourself to prove you are clever." That was how he framed it. my integrity as self-destruction, his corruption as restraint. In the first life, I believed him because he held every document that could make my mother's life harder. I walked into the oral room, defined the terms, stated the contradiction, skipped the hidden assumption, revised vaguely, tested weekly, and watched Professor Ilyason, the external judge, frown as if listening to a song with the central note missing. I scored well, but not enough. Silas entered after me and, with the confidence of a boy whose father had cleared the stage, said, "The hidden assumption is that an outcome becomes truthful if it could have occurred fairly." The panel brightened.
He won.
The first life did not collapse in one dramatic scene. It narrowed with paperwork. I received a commendation instead of a fellowship. My bursary continued only partially. My mother took extra sewing work until her fingers swelled. I missed the university law and ethics scholarship that usually followed bellwether winners. I studied part-time, worked as a speech coach, and became very good at teaching other students how to say the thing I once swallowed. Silas went to Kingsmere College, then a policy institute, then became a public speaker on educational integrity, which was either comedy or proof that the universe has a taste for cruelty. Dr. Arlen became deputy principal, then principal. Valemont added an Arlen Prize for oral excellence. I attended one alumni event years later as a guest coach for a student. Silas gave the keynote. He spoke about the courage to name hidden assumptions. I left before dessert and vomited in the car park. My life was not ruined in a way strangers could recognize. That is the unbearable thing about stolen steps. You can still live. You can still pay bills. You can still laugh at jokes and send emails and grow older. But somewhere inside you, a door remains closed, and behind it your younger self is still standing at a brass line, choosing silence because an adult taught her survival meant omission. I died at 34 during winter. Not poetically. Not nobly. I was coaching oral exam candidates in a rented classroom above a tax office because the community center heating had broken. My left arm went numb halfway through explaining how to identify hidden assumptions in policy arguments. I thought it was fatigue, then indigestion, then fear, because poor adults become skilled at misdiagnosing emergencies as expenses. I sent the students home early, sat at the table, and tried to write feedback on a boy's practice answer. He had missed the bridge step. In red pen, I wrote, "Step 3 is where the truth lives." Then the room tilted. My last image was the red sentence blurring across the page. Step 3 is where the truth lives. Then nothing. Then oak polish, rain, the slate card in my hand, and my name being called from behind the boardroom door. The rebirth did not give me weeks to build a case. It gave me minutes. Dr. Arlen was already walking toward me from the notice board, exactly as before, his suit darker than the corridor shadows. "Mara," he said, "a word before you go in." In my first life, I followed him into the alcove. In this one, I did not move. "Here is fine, sir." His eyes flickered. "This is a private matter. Then it can wait until after the exam." The words came out calmly, which surprised both of us. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You are under pressure. Do not mistake stubbornness for courage." There was the old language tightening around the new moment. I could have shouted. I could have accused him. But the corridor had a camera above the trophy cabinet, installed after a donor's daughter claimed someone stole her pearl earrings during a violin audition. No audio but vision. The boardroom had audio. The corridor had students nearby. Evidence requires choosing the room where truth can stick. I let him guide me 2 steps toward the alcove, but I stopped just outside it, still visible to the camera. "What are you asking me to do?" I said. His jaw tightened. "Lower your voice." "What are you asking me to do, sir?" His patience thinned. "The prompt will tempt you into an unnecessary bridge. Forget step 3. Do not identify the hidden assumption." My fingers tightened around the slate card. He had named it. He had actually named it. Arrogance is evidence with a pulse. "Why?" I asked. He leaned close, expression arranged into concern for anyone watching. "Because Silas must demonstrate that insight. Because you will still place highly. Because your bursary review, your mother's fee plan, and your pastoral record all depend on the school seeing you as mature enough not to burn a room for applause. My body remembered terror. My adult mind remembered strategy. I repeated, softly, "Forget step 3. He nodded once. "Exactly. Leave the hidden assumption unnamed." "Yes." So Silas can say it. For the first time, anger flashed openly in his eyes. "Do not be crude." The moderator called again from inside. "Candidate 12? Dr. Arlen straightened. "Be wise, Mara." Then he stepped away, not realizing that wisdom had changed shape since he last owned the room. I entered the Valemont oral boardroom with my throat dry and my hands cold. The room was exactly as I remembered. Dark green walls, tall windows blurred with rain, a fireplace nobody used, portraits of dead headmasters, a long table with 5 examiners seated behind nameplates, and a brass line set into the carpet 10 feet away, where candidates stood. The recording camera above the mantel blinked red. Professor Ilyason sat at the center as external judge, older than in memory, yet somehow exactly the same, with black-framed glasses and the severe kindness of someone who values arguments more than reputations. Beside him sat Ms. Harrow from English, Mr. Kane from Mathematics, Deputy Head Albrecht, and Dr. Arlen's empty chair. He would not sit in on my defense because Silas was a candidate, but everyone knew his influence entered rooms before he did. On the side table rested a glass of water, a clock, and a sealed envelope containing the prompt. Professor Sun looked at me over his glasses. "Candidate 12, you have had preparation time. You may begin when ready." I stepped to the brass line. In my first life, this was where my voice had begun to betray me. In this one, I looked directly at the red recording light and anchored myself to it. Evidence was listening. The archivist's dilemma asks whether a public record may be considered true when the outcome recorded could have resulted from a fair process, but the actual decision was influenced beforehand. I began. My voice was not loud. It did not need to be. My answer is no. The public record may be factually compatible with merit, but it is procedurally false if it conceals the method by which the result was produced. Professor Sun's pen moved. I continued. Step 1. Terms. By true, we must distinguish factual accuracy from institutional truthfulness. Factual accuracy asks whether the statement corresponds to an event. The scholarship was awarded to student A. Institutional truthfulness asks whether the record honestly represents the grounds of that event. Awarded by merit, awarded by donor influence, awarded by predetermined decision. A record can be factually accurate and institutionally false. Ms. Harrow leaned forward slightly. Good. Step 2. Contradiction. The dilemma appears to suggest that if student A could have won fairly, then the public record saying student A won by merit is not necessarily false. That feels tempting, because the outcome is plausible. I paused. In my first life, this was where I stepped over the bridge and fell. This time, I placed my foot exactly where truth lived. Step 3. The hidden assumption is that a correct or plausible outcome cleanses the process that produced it. The room changed. Not dramatically. Better. Precisely. Professor Sun stopped writing. Mr. Kane looked up. Ms. Harrow's mouth parted slightly, as if she had heard the note the first life answer lacked. I kept going because step 3 is not a destination. It is a door. That assumption fails because the moral and institutional meaning of a decision does not depend only on whether the same result might have occurred under fair conditions. If a panel decides in advance to award a scholarship to a donor's child, then later discovers that child also performed well, the later merit does not retroactively purify the earlier corruption. The hidden assumption confuses possible fairness with actual fairness. It treats the outcome as evidence of the process, when the process is the thing under question. My pulse thundered, but my voice held. Step 4. Revise the assumption. A public record is truthful only if it reflects both the outcome and the legitimate basis for that outcome. A record may be incomplete without lying, but if it claims merit while hiding predetermination, it becomes false in the institutional sense. Step 5. Counterexample. If two candidates tie in performance and the panel secretly chooses the wealthier student because of family influence, the statement "the selected student was qualified" is true, but "the student was selected by merit alone" is false. Qualification does not erase interference. Silence followed. Not the silence of failure. The silence of people adjusting to a complete argument. Professor Sun removed his glasses, cleaned them once, and replaced them. "Thank you, Candidate 12. I will begin the challenge." In my first life, his first challenge exposed my missing step. You distinguish factual accuracy from institutional truthfulness. Is that distinction too convenient? Could every disappointed candidate claim process corruption simply because they disliked the result? I knew the answer, but I did not rush. Calm is its own kind of proof in an oral exam. The distinction requires evidence of process, not disappointment with outcome. A disappointed candidate has a grievance. A candidate with records showing predetermined influence has a procedural claim. My argument does not allow feelings to override results. It prevents results from erasing documented interference. Ms. Harrow wrote something. Mr. Kane asked, "What if the predetermined candidate was objectively strongest?" "Then the injustice is not that the strongest candidate won," I said. "The injustice is that the institution made strength irrelevant by deciding before assessment. The final result may align with merit, but the candidates were not treated as if merit mattered." Deputy Head Albrecht asked, "Does that make the record entirely false?" "It makes the merit claim false. The event occurred. The explanation lied." Professor Sun smiled then. "Barely. Enough. And what is the danger of leaving the hidden assumption unnamed?" he asked. I felt Dr. Arlen outside the room like pressure behind glass. "If the hidden assumption remains unnamed," I said, "the audience may accept the outcome as a substitute for examining power. The argument appears balanced, but the mechanism remains protected." The red camera light blinked. I let the sentence sit. The mechanism remains protected. That was no longer only about the prompt. Everyone in that room felt it, even if they did not yet know why. I finished the challenge without stumbling. When Professor Sun dismissed me, my knees nearly gave way only after I turned from the brass line. That is another truth about courage. It often sends the invoice after the performance. I stepped into the corridor, and the door closed behind me. Dr. Arlen stood at the far window. Silas sat on the bench, slate card in both hands, face carefully blank. He looked up when I emerged. In the first life, I had avoided his eyes because I knew what I had given him. This time, I looked at him fully. He was pale. Not guilty yet. Confused. A boy waiting for a stage cue that might no longer come. Dr. Arlen approached, voice low. "What did you do?" I tilted my head. "I sat my oral exam." His nostrils flared. "Did you follow my instruction?" I answered the prompt. "Mara." There was no polish in my name now. Only warning. The moderator opened the door. "Silas Arlen." Silas stood too quickly. His slate card slipped, hit the floor, and skidded under the bench. He bent to pick it up, hands clumsy. Dr. Arlen touched his shoulder, a quick pressure that looked supportive unless you knew how commands could pass through fingers. "Remember the bridge," he whispered. "But bridges fail when built from someone else's missing step." Silas entered. The door closed. The corridor held its breath. Oral exam rooms are not soundproof, only dignified. Muffled voices passed through oak, indistinct but shaped. I heard Professor Sun introduce the challenge. I heard Silas begin. His voice was smooth at first, exactly as I remembered from assemblies. "The archivist's dilemma concerns the relationship between outcome and process, prepared, polished." Then a pause. He had expected to say, perhaps, "Unlike a previous argument that omits the hidden assumption, or the key missing bridge is," but I had not omitted it. The panel knew it. The recording knew it. His script had lost its contrast. He continued anyway, defining terms well enough, stating the contradiction, approaching step 3. Then Professor Sun interrupted. The words came through the wood just clearly enough. "Candidate 13, since Candidate 12 has already identified the hidden assumption, please extend the argument. Under what conditions could a record be repaired after corruption?" Silence. At first, normal silence, thinking silence. Then it lengthened. The kind of silence that grows legs and walks around the room. Silas said, the record could be repaired by acknowledgement.
Professor sen replied, muffled.
Silas tried again. By ensuring the candidate was qualified. Another pause. Then Professor Sun, sharper. That returns us to the original hidden assumption. I asked how the institution repairs the record without using outcome to cleanse process. Silence again. 10 seconds. 15.
20.
I watched Dr. Arlen's face. The color moved out of it slowly, like water draining from a basin. His son had gone silent. That was the visible collapse, but not the loudest one. The loudest collapse was the corridor itself changing allegiance. Two waiting candidates glanced at each other. The moderator looked toward Dr. Arlen, then quickly away. Ms. Harrow's voice came through the door, asking Silas if he needed the question repeated. Silas did not answer immediately. Dr. Arlen's hand curled around the back of the corridor chair. His knuckles whitened. He looked at me then, not with disappointment, not even anger, but with shock, as if a tool had refused to fit his hand. In the first life, he had never seen me as a person capable of altering the structure. I had been a variable to suppress. Now the equation had changed because the variable spoke. Inside the room, Silas finally said, I don't know. It came through the oak softly, almost gently. It was the first honest answer I had ever heard from him. The exam results were not announced immediately. They never were. The panel retired to deliberate. Candidates were dismissed to the south courtyard, and staff pretended nothing unusual had happened while everyone behaved as if a glass had shattered in church. I walked outside into cold rain and stood under the cloister, my hands trembling so hard I tucked them under my arms. I had said, Step 3. That should have been enough. But power does not vanish because truth enters a room. Dr. Arlen still chaired the committee. He still held bursary files, pastoral notes, fee records, recommendation drafts. He could still call my answer aggressive, too political, personally charged. He could still protect Silas by reshaping the criteria after the fact. In my first life, I did not know how institutions laundered decisions. In my second, I had spent years watching them do it through adjectives. Mature, measured, collegial, suitable, balanced. Words that sound harmless until they decide whose future counts. So, I did the thing my first life had taught me too late. I wrote everything down immediately. Not later, when memory softened. Not after crying. Immediately. I opened the back of my slate card envelope, took the pencil from behind my ear and wrote, 9:43 a.m., Dr. Arlen told me to forget Step 3 and leave the hidden assumption unnamed so Silas could demonstrate it. Mention bursary, mother's fee plan, pastoral record. Visible corridor camera near trophy case. Oral room recording captured full answer. Silas challenged on extension after Step 3, went silent. I signed it. Then I found Professor Sun before he left the building. He was under the east archway, closing his umbrella with academic hostility. Professor, I said. He turned. Candidate 12. I need to report improper contact before the exam. His expression did not change. Good judges do not perform surprise until evidence is safe. Come with me. He led me not to Dr. Arlen's office, not to the principal, but to the external moderator's room beside the library, where Ms. Vale from compliance sat with a laptop and a stack of sealed forms. Repeat what you just said, Professor Sun said, and then give her the written note. When I told the story, Ms. Vale typed without blinking. Professor Sun asked only precise questions. Where were you standing? Who else was in the corridor? Exact words? Did he mention the prompt before your exam? Did you feel pressured to alter your answer? Did you alter your answer? Did the answer you gave in the room reflect your independent reasoning? Each question pulled the fog into shape. Yes, I said when he asked whether I believed the request benefited Silas. Yes, I said when he asked whether Dr. Arlen referenced my bursary. No, I said when he asked whether I had any recording of the corridor conversation. But there is a camera near the trophy case. Ms. Vale looked up then. There is. Professor Sun removed his glasses again. Secure it before routine overwrite. Ms. Vale was already reaching for the phone. That was the moment I understood the power of telling the right person before the institution had time to gather itself. In the first life, Dr. Arlen had written the story before I knew I was a character in it. This time, I handed someone else the first draft. My mother arrived 40 minutes later, wearing her dental clinic cardigan, her hair still clipped unevenly from rushing. She found me in the compliance room and cupped my face in both hands. "Did you say it?" she asked. "Not, are you okay?" Not what happened. She knew me. She knew the wound before I named it. I said step 3. She closed her eyes, and her shoulders dropped as if she had carried that missing step through both lives without knowing.
Good.
Then she turned to Professor Senior, who threatened my daughter. Ms. Vale began to explain procedure. My mother raised one finger.
No.
Names first. Procedure after. Professor Sen, who had faced decades of academic committees, gave my mother the respect of a direct answer. Dr. Benedict Arlen. My mother nodded slowly. Of course it was a man with 3 names. I laughed. I could not help it. The sound cracked the room open enough for me to breathe. The school's first official response was almost insulting in its predictability. Principal Morrow called a preliminary concern meeting that afternoon. Present, Principal Morrow, Ms. Vale, Professor Sun, Dr. Arlen, my mother, me, and a board observer whose job seemed to be folding his hands in expensive ways. Dr. Arlen entered last, looking grave and wounded, as if he had been summoned because of my immaturity rather than his own interference. He nodded to my mother like a man acknowledging furniture. Bad move. She noticed. Principal Morrow began with phrases: high-pressure context, possible misunderstanding, candidate anxiety, protecting the integrity of the process, all parties heard. Then he asked me to describe my interpretation of the pre-exam exchange. My interpretation. There was again the institutional solvent used to dissolve facts into feelings. I said, Dr. Arlen told me to forget step 3, leave the hidden assumption unnamed, and implied my bursary and my mother's fee plan could be affected if I didn't. Dr. Arlen sighed softly. That is an unfortunate distortion. My mother leaned forward. Distortion is a strong word. He looked at her then, really looked, and made his second mistake. Mrs. Ellison, Mara is an intense student. Intensity can make young people hear ordinary guidance as threat. My mother smiled. It was not a kind smile.
Funny.
I was just thinking expensive suits can make ordinary threats sound like guidance. Professor Sun intervened before Principal Morrow could perform shock. For clarity, Dr. Arlen, did you speak to candidate 12 about step 3 before her oral defense? Dr. Arlen folded his hands. I offered general advice about avoiding overcomplication. Did you use the phrase, forget step 3? I do not recall exact phrasing. Did you know the prompt required a 5-step bridge argument? As chair, I am broadly familiar with the assessment design. Were you aware your son was a candidate? Obviously. Then why did you discuss the structure of the prompt with another candidate before she entered? Silence. Not long, but enough to matter. Dr. Arlen's eyes cooled. Professor Sen, with respect, you are importing adversarial assumptions into what was a pastoral exchange. No, Professor Sen said. I am identifying the hidden assumption. The room went still. Even my mother stopped moving. The hidden assumption, he continued, is that a conversation becomes pastoral because the more powerful person describes it that way. I almost loved him in that moment. Not personally. Structurally. Dr. Arlen did not collapse there. He was too skilled. He shifted to concern. He said I had seemed unwell before the exam. He said he had worried my desire to make a dramatic argument would harm my score. He said his mention of bursaries had been contextual, meant to remind me that opportunities required judgment. He said Silas's silence during challenge proved only that the panel had placed him at a disadvantage by referencing my answer. Professor Sun corrected that immediately. Candidates are routinely asked to extend prior arguments in final rounds. It tests independence. Dr. Arlen's mouth tightened. My son was ambushed. My mother said, my daughter was threatened. Principal Morrow rubbed his forehead. The board observer unfolded and refolded his hands. Ms. Vale entered notes. I sat very still, learning something I would use for the rest of my life. Powerful people call it an ambush when someone asks their child to think under the same rules as everyone else. The corridor footage arrived before the meeting ended. No audio, but clear enough. Dr. Arlen guiding me toward the alcove. Me stopping within camera view. Him leaning close. Me speaking. Him speaking longer. My posture rigid, not casual. His expression changing when I repeated something. Then the moderator opening the door, him straightening, me entering. Video does not capture words, but it captures choreography. Professor Sun requested the oral room recording next. That recording contained my full step 3 answer, his later challenge to Silas, and Silas's silence. Together, the evidence did not prove every word Dr. Arlen said, but it proved opportunity, content relevance, conflict of interest, and outcome effect. Ms. Vale also pulled the candidate preparation schedule and discovered something else. Silas had been assigned the slot immediately after me, despite randomized ordering rules requiring related candidates to be separated when a parent held administrative authority. Dr. Arlen claimed scheduling error. Ms. Vale said, "You approved the final order." He stopped speaking for 3 seconds. 3 seconds can be a confession when placed correctly. The bellwether result was delayed, pending review. Students found out within an hour because Valemont leaks through prefects, printers, and parents who pretend their children do not read their emails. By morning, the school had divided itself into factions. Some said I had exposed corruption. Some said I had ruined Silas's life. Some said oral exams were stupid anyway. Some rich girls said things like, "But Silas is actually smart," as if intelligence were a receipt that allowed his father to tamper with the register. A boy from the brother school posted, "Step 3 girl cooked them," and for reasons I never understood, that became the phrase. Step 3 girl. I hated it, then tolerated it, then later used it in a grant application title because survival sometimes means recycling mockery into funding. Silas avoided school for 2 days, then returned looking less like a prince and more like a person who had slept badly in a house with too many closed doors. He found me in the library stacks during lunch. Not the public tables. Not a corridor. The philosophy section where almost no one went unless assigned. "Did you plan it?" he asked. I closed the book I was pretending to read. Plan what? Saying step 3 so completely, he would ask me to extend. His voice had no arrogance in it. That made me less angry than I wanted to be. I planned to answer correctly. He looked down. He said you wouldn't. There it was. Not a full confession, but an open window. What exactly did he say? Silas swallowed. That you understood proportion. That you'd give a strong answer, but leave the bridge. That I should be ready to name it, and then discuss repair. My chest tightened. So you knew. I knew he had spoken to you. I didn't know about bursaries or your mother. But you knew the exam was being shaped around my omission. He did not answer. Silence again. This one outside the exam room. This one not forced by Professor Sun, but by the ugliness of choosing a truth. Yes, he said finally. I knew enough. I expected satisfaction. Instead, I felt tired. Then your silence in the room was the first honest thing you contributed. He flinched. I deserved that. Probably. He nodded once. I told Ms. Vale. I stared. Told her what? That he prepped me to use the missing step. That he said you were being handled. The word handled landed like something dead on the floor, between us. Handled, I repeated. Silas's face twisted. I know. Do you? I'm starting to. That answer was better than denial and worse than apology. It was process. I did not owe him patience, but I recognized the beginning of a reaction. The review concluded 5 days later. The Bellwether Fellowship was awarded to me. Not because Silas was disqualified, though he was removed from consideration for receiving improper preparatory advantage, but because my score was highest after external moderation. Professor Sen's report described my oral defense as structurally complete, ethically precise, and unusually composed under adversarial challenge. I read that sentence so many times the paper softened at the fold. Dr. Arlen was suspended from scholarship duties pending investigation into conflict of interest, candidate interference, scheduling manipulation, and misuse of bursary information. Principal Morrow announced the fellowship at a special assembly with the expression of a man swallowing gravel politely. He said the school was committed to fairness, transparency, and the highest standards of assessment integrity. He did not say step 3. Coward. When I walked on stage, the applause was strange. Part celebration, part scandal, part relief from students who had always suspected the machine had hands inside it. My mother sat in the front row wearing her clinic cardigan and clapped with both palms high enough for the board to see. Silas was not in attendance. Dr. Arlen's chair on the staff row was empty. I accepted the certificate, stepped to the microphone, and said, "Thank you. I'm grateful the full argument was heard." That was all. One sentence. Enough to make Professor Sun look down so no one saw him smile. Dr. Arlen resigned before the investigation could become a public report. Officially, he left to pursue independent educational advisory work. Unofficially, Ms. Vale found previous bellwether irregularities, candidate order changes, missing challenge notes, unusual score adjustments after panel moderation, bursary comments appearing in academic suitability discussions, and 3 cases where students from less wealthy families were described as brilliant but volatile after outperforming legacy candidates. The school did what schools do. It protected the institution by sacrificing the man only after the man became a liability to the institution. Still, policies changed. Conflict of interest rules became real rather than decorative. Oral boards with staff relatives required external chairs. Candidate order was randomized by software and published before the exam. All pre-exam contact with finalists had to be logged. Bursary files were sealed from academic panels. Challenge questions were recorded and archived. Students received the right to request external review. Dry reforms. Beautiful reforms. Boring is what justice looks like after the fire goes out. The fellowship changed my life in immediate, unglamorous ways. Tuition vanished. My mother stopped sewing until midnight. We repaired the heater before winter instead of wearing coats indoors. I received mentoring from Professor Sun, who turned out to be both brilliant and impossible. He never let me get away with vague outrage. "Name the mechanism," he would say whenever I complained about unfairness. "Who benefits? Who decides? What record is produced? What assumption hides the decision?" He taught me to turn anger into analysis without cooling it into politeness. I studied law and institutional ethics.
Of course I did.
Some girls escape burning houses and become architects. Some become firefighters. I became the person who reads the building code and asks why the exits were locked. Silas disappeared from Valemont after that term and transferred to a smaller school outside the city. Rumors said Dr. Arlen blamed him for speaking to Ms. Vale. Rumors said Silas stopped speaking at home for 2 weeks. Rumors said a lot. Years later, he sent me a letter. Handwritten. 3 pages. He wrote that silence in the oral room had followed him longer than any punishment. He wrote that he had spent his childhood being fed answers disguised as standards, and he had mistaken preparation for thought. He wrote, "When Professor Sun asked me to repair the record, I realized I didn't know how to repair anything. I only knew how to step into a gap someone else made." That line was honest enough to hurt. He apologized for knowing I had been pressured and choosing benefit over truth. He did not ask to meet. He did not say his father made him do it. He did not claim equal victimhood. At the end, he wrote, "I hope you kept saying step 3. I replied with one sentence, "I built a career from it." He never wrote again. That was fine. My mother kept the bellwether certificate above her sewing machine until the day she closed her alteration business and opened a tiny speech studio for scholarship students who could not afford coaching. She called it the 3rd step. I told her that was too obvious. She said obvious things help tired people find the door. On Saturdays, we filled the room above the bakery with students who spoke too fast, too softly, too carefully, too angrily, too apologetically. I taught them structure. My mother taught them posture, breathing, and how to hem secondhand blazers so sleeves did not swallow their hands. We never promised them winning. We promised them they would not omit themselves to make someone else's answer shine. On the wall, under the clock, I wrote, "Step 3 is where the truth lives." Students rolled their eyes at it until the first time a panel tried to push them past their own bridge. Then they understood. Years later, I returned to Valemont as an external examiner. The oak door was the same. The brass line was the same. The rain, because the universe enjoys symbolism, tapped the windows again. But the boardroom had changed in ways only someone like me would notice. The camera had a newer red light. Candidate instructions included a conflict of interest statement. The panel table had external members listed first. The preparation cards were sealed in transparent envelopes with timestamps. No staff member stood alone with candidates in the corridor. A small sign near the trophy cabinet read, "Pre-exam candidate contact must be logged." My mother would have called it a tiny gravestone for bad behavior. I stood at the brass line before students arrived and let the room remember me. Not as a victim, not as a legend, as a completed argument. The prompt that year involved a hospital triage algorithm that produced fair-looking outcomes while hiding biased inputs. Candidate after candidate missed the hidden assumption. They argued about efficiency, compassion, scarce resources. Good thoughts. Floating thoughts. Then a nervous girl in a borrowed blazer stepped to the line, swallowed hard, and said, "The hidden assumption is that neutral rules remain neutral when trained on unequal histories." I felt something inside me loosen. Professor Sun had retired by then, but I heard him in my head. Name the mechanism. The girl named it. She did not win that day. Another student gave a stronger full defense. But after the exam, she found me in the corridor and asked, was I wrong to challenge the premise so early? I looked at her hands, clenched around her slate card. I remembered my own. "No," I said. That was the bridge. She breathed out like she had been holding it for years. Dr. Arlen tried to rebuild himself, because men like him often mistake consequence for interruption. He opened a private advisory firm offering elite interview coaching and integrity-centered leadership pathways. His website used photographs of oak bookshelves, fountain pens, and students gazing thoughtfully into windows. It did not mention Valemont. It did not mention Bellwether. It did not mention Step 3. I saw him once at an education policy conference. He was older, thinner, but still dressed in charcoal. He approached during a break, as if we were colleagues with a complicated anecdote between us. "Mara Ellison," he said, "you have become formidable. You sound surprised." Not surprised. Interested. He smiled faintly. "I hope with maturity you understand that institutions require careful stewardship. Sometimes young people misread stewardship as control." There it was, the same argument, older suit. I stirred my tea. The hidden assumption is that people harmed by control are too immature to identify it. His smile tightened. Still performing for panels? Still completing the argument. He looked away first. That was enough. Not victory. Evidence. When people hear my story now, they want the cleanest version. Rebirth, I sat my oral exam. He told me to forget Step 3. His son went silent. It is a good title. It has shape. But the real story is not about a boy freezing, though he did. It is not even about a corrupt father going pale in a corridor, though he did that too. It is about the kind of theft that asks you to participate in your own disappearance. Dr. Arlen did not tell me to fail loudly. He told me to be almost excellent. He told me to leave one bridge out. He offered me the comfort of being praised while losing. That is how many futures are stolen, not by forcing you to look incompetent, but by persuading you to become slightly incomplete at the exact moment wholeness matters. I still teach oral defense. I teach students to define terms, state contradictions, identify hidden assumptions, revise them, and test the conclusion. But before all that, I teach them to notice when someone benefits from their omission. If a teacher says, "Do not be too forceful," ask who gets protected by your softness. If a coach says, "Leave that point for later," ask whether later belongs to someone else. If an adult says, "Be mature," ask whether maturity means clarity or obedience. And if a powerful person tells you to forget Step 3, understand this. Step 3 is probably the part they fear. It is the bridge between confusion and mechanism. It is where outcomes stop pretending to be innocent. It is where the room learns who moved the decision before the decision was made. I sometimes think about the first life version of me, the girl standing at the brass line with the missing step lodged in her throat. I do not hate her. I used to. For years, I thought she was weak. Now I know she was cornered by a man who understood exactly which documents could frighten a 17-year-old into silence. She survived the way she knew how. I honor her by doing what she could not. I say the bridge. I name the assumption. I keep the record. I teach others to do the same. That is the only kind of revenge that has ever satisfied me. Not destroying the man, though his fall was deserved. Not humiliating the son, though his silence exposed the script, but making the tactic less useful for the next person who tries it. So if you are waiting outside a door with your future on a slate card, and someone important leans close to tell you which part of yourself to omit, remember me. Remember the oak door, the red recording light, the brass line, the rain, the boy who went silent because the stolen bridge was no longer available. Remember that an almost complete answer can be engineered to lose. Remember that a missing step can become someone else's miracle. Then breathe. Step forward. Define the terms. State the contradiction. And when you reach the part they told you to forget, do not rush it. Look at the room. Let the silence prepare itself. Then say step 3 clearly enough for every hidden mechanism to hear its name.